The forest around them shifted positions, rearranging itself like a maze. At first, none of them said it out loud. The campsite had seemed ordinary when they arrived. Just a shallow clearing ringed by cedar and hemlock, the earth soft with years of fallen needles. No trails, no signage, just the quiet assurance of remoteness that had drawn them there in the first place. Miles from the nearest road, Mara had pitched the first tent. Isaac gathered wood. Leo mapped the area in careful circles with a handheld GPS that kept blinking in and out of signal like it couldn't quite decide where it was. By dusk, the forest had gone silent. Not peaceful silence. A hollow one. No insects. No distant birds. Even the wind seemed to thin out between the trunks, leaving the air heavy and unmoving. They noticed the first change after dinner. Leo stood near the treeline, turning slowly in place. Did that fallen log move? Mara glanced up from rinsing a tin cup. What log? There was one there. He pointed west. About 20 feet out. Moss-covered. They all looked. Nothing lay there but an open strip of soil and scattered ferns. Isaac shrugged. You probably saw it from a different angle. Leo said nothing, but he checked the GPS again. Still blinking. That night, the forest rearranged itself. They woke to the sound of footsteps circling the tents. Not heavy ones, just soft pressure in the needles. A slow pacing. Isaac unzipped the flap and shined his flashlight out. The beam slid across trees. Except the trees weren't where they had been. The clearing had narrowed. The trunks leaned closer, their shadows bending inward like ribs tightening around a lung. Did we pitch in a different spot? Isaac muttered. Mara crawled halfway out of her tent. No, she knew she was right. She had chosen the site carefully. Flat ground, 3 large cedars forming a rough triangle around the fire pit. Now there were 4, and the fire pit had shifted 2 feet to the left. They stared at it. The ashes inside were undisturbed. Leo stepped outside. Okay, he said quietly. No one panic. But my GPS says we moved 30 meters overnight. Mara frowned. That's not possible. I know. The path they'd used to reach the clearing was gone by morning. Not overgrown. Gone. Where the narrow corridor of crushed grass and broken twigs had been, there was now dense brush and a steep slope that none of them remembered climbing. They walked in widening circles, trying to reorient. But the forest kept bending. Trails appeared where they hadn't been minutes before. Landmarks drifted subtly out of alignment. A large split-barked pine that Mara distinctly remembered near the creek now stood far uphill, its roots clawing into stone. Something's wrong with the terrain, Leo whispered. Or with us, Isaac said. They marked trees with bright strips of orange tape. Within an hour, the tape started appearing ahead of them. Not behind. Mara stopped when she noticed it. That's impossible. She walked back to the last tree she had tied. The tape was still there, but another identical strip fluttered farther down the trail. Exactly the same knot, same torn edge. Leo's voice tightened. We're looping. No, Mara said slowly. Her eyes moved across the trunks. They're moving. They returned to camp by accident. The clearing had rotated. The 4 cedars now stood in a perfect square. Their tents were closer together than before, almost touching. None of them remembered pitching them that way. Night fell again. The silence deepened. And sometime after midnight, the forest spoke. It began as a whisper between the trees. At first Mara thought it was wind. Then she heard her own voice. Just follow the creek back. She froze. That was something she'd said earlier that day. Isaac's voice answered from deeper in the dark. Trail should be east. Leo sat upright in his sleeping bag. That's not me, he said. The voices repeated. Not perfectly. Each word came back slightly stretched, like sound traveling through water. Follow the creek back. Trail should be east. The forest was mimicking them. Soft footsteps followed the echoes, circling just beyond the firelight. One set for each of them, but sometimes there were 4 or 5. They stayed awake until dawn. When light returned, the clearing had moved again. This time the shift was obvious. The slope of the ground had reversed. The fire pit now sat on a slight incline, and the creek they had used for water ran in the opposite direction. Leo stared at his map. None of the coordinates made sense anymore. "We're not lost," Mara said quietly. They looked at her. "We're being arranged." No one asked what she meant. They all felt it. The forest wasn't random. Every shift felt deliberate. Paths opened just long enough to guide them forward before folding back into brush. The terrain tightened behind them, like walls sliding into place. By the third day, the maze had structure. Ridges formed corridors. Dense thickets sealed the sides. The sky narrowed into a twisting strip of pale gray above them. And always, just ahead, something waited. A darker space between trees. They followed it because every other direction closed. Isaac's voice cracked once. "Maybe it wants us to reach something." "Or someone," Leo said. Late that afternoon, they found the center. It was a depression in the earth, wide and circular. No trees grew there. The ground was bare soil, smooth and slightly concave, like a bowl carved into the forest floor. Around the edge stood dozens of tall cedars, all perfectly spaced. Mara felt a quiet dread settle into her chest. "A maze," she whispered. Leo turned slowly. The corridors they'd followed now connected to the circle like spokes. Every path led here. Isaac noticed something near the center. Footprints. Old ones. Hundreds layered over each other. Different sizes. Different directions. Some human. Some not. The air inside the circle vibrated faintly. A low hum deep in the soil. Mara felt it through the soles of her boots. Then the trees shifted again. Not subtly this time. They leaned. The circle tightened. The paths behind them sealed shut with groaning wood and sliding earth. From the far side of the ring, something stepped forward. It wasn't a creature in any familiar sense. The shape seemed built from pieces of the forest itself. Branches bending like joints. Bark folding inward where a face might be. Its body tall and thin as a tree trunk, but moving with slow, deliberate awareness. When it breathed, the surrounding trunks shuddered. The maze wasn't the forest. The maze was its body. Each corridor a limb guiding prey inward. Each shift a muscle tightening. Leo whispered, "It's been feeding." The thing tilted its head, and the ground rearranged again. Mara felt the soil soften beneath her feet, like roots opening. Isaac tried to run, but the path he chose folded shut in seconds. The cedars closed ranks. The entity stepped closer, towering now, its bark skin splitting slightly to reveal dark, hollow spaces inside. Not organs, rooms, places where movement still stirred faintly. The last thing Mara saw before the ground swallowed her boots was the maze resetting. Trees sliding back, paths unfolding outward again. Far away, at the forest's edge, a faint trail opened briefly. Waiting. 2 weeks later, another group of hikers would find it. The path would look old but walkable. And somewhere deep beyond the trees, the maze would begin slowly rearranging itself once more. They woke to find their tent pitched in a completely different location than where they set it. First, no one moved. Mara lay on her side, staring at the pale fabric of the tent ceiling while the strange awareness slowly settled in her chest. Something about the light felt wrong. Too bright on one side, too dim on the other. The ground beneath her sleeping pad sloped gently downhill. It hadn't last night. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Across the tent, Owen shifted in his bag. "Feel what?" "The ground." He pushed himself up onto one elbow. The nylon walls rustled softly. Beside him, Jules exhaled the slow breath of someone half awake, while Aaron lay still near the entrance. Owen pressed a hand against the floor. "Yeah." The slope was unmistakable. Last night they'd pitched the tent on a level patch of pine needles in a shallow clearing. Mara had checked it twice before staking the corners. Now gravity pulled subtly toward the south wall. Aaron unzipped the flap and leaned out. Cold morning air slid into the tent. Then he stopped moving. "What?" Jules asked groggily. Aaron didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had flattened. We didn't camp here. They crawled out one by one. The forest that surrounded them was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, nothing so obvious as a cliff where none had been before, but wrong in the way a familiar room feels when someone has quietly rearranged the furniture. The clearing they remembered was gone. Instead, they stood on a narrow shelf of earth overlooking a steep drop filled with tangled alder and mossy boulders. Tall cedar trunks pressed close behind them, their bark dark with morning damp. Mara turned slowly. Our fire pit. There wasn't one. No circle of stones. No charcoal scar in the soil. Just untouched needles. Owen crouched beside one of the tent stakes. The cord was still tied in the knot he'd used the night before. So we didn't sleepwalk, he said quietly. Aaron pointed downhill. The valley below looked deep and unfamiliar. Fog pooled between the trees like pale water. That drop definitely wasn't next to us. Jules rubbed her arms. Maybe we hiked farther than we thought yesterday. No, Mara said. She pointed through the trees behind them. A fallen log lay there, split down the middle by age and rot. I remember that. They'd passed it on the way to the clearing. But it had been 30 minutes back along the trail. Not 5 feet from their tent. Silence spread slowly among them. The forest held its breath. No birds. No insects. Not even the soft rattle of wind in the canopy. Just the faint creak of trunks shifting against one another. Aaron checked his watch. 7:12 a.m. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said carefully. We'll retrace yesterday's path. They packed quickly. But when they stepped away from the tent, Mara felt something strange settle in the back of her mind. A sense of being repositioned. Not lost. Moved. They followed what should have been the trail. Except the terrain bent strangely around them. The ridge they remembered climbing now curved in the opposite direction. Landmarks appeared where they shouldn't. Clusters of stone, leaning trees, shallow dips in the earth that none of them recognized. Owen paused beside a massive cedar. I swear we passed this earlier. Aaron frowned. Impossible. The bark had a long pale scar that ran from root to shoulder height. Mara remembered touching it. But the direction was wrong. That scar faced west yesterday, she said quietly. Now it faced east. Jules laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Trees don't rotate. They kept walking. The trail narrowed, then widened, then dissolved entirely into brush. And then, without warning, they stepped back into the exact place they'd started. Their tent stood on the slope overlooking the foggy valley. The stakes undisturbed. Aaron stared. We walked in a straight line. No, Mara said. She pointed at the ground. Their footprints formed a tight circle. Owen exhaled slowly. That's not possible. They tried again. Different direction. Same result. By midday the forest had begun to change more obviously. Paths they'd walked minutes before sealed behind them with dense undergrowth. Fallen logs appeared across routes that had been open. The slope of the terrain shifted subtly underfoot, as if the ground itself were tilting. And once, just once, Mara heard something walking behind them, perfectly matching their pace. 4 sets of footsteps, except there were only 4 of them. She stopped. The extra steps continued for 2 more beats, then stopped too. Did you hear that? She asked. No one answered. They all had. Late in the afternoon, the mimicry began. Aaron was ahead of the group when they heard his voice drift through the trees. Hey, over here. Jules turned toward the sound instantly. Aaron frowned. That wasn't me. The voice came again, farther away. Guys. It sounded almost right. Almost. The pitch dragged slightly, stretched like a recording played too slowly. Mara felt cold creep along her spine. It's repeating us. Owen whispered. Or practicing. They stopped talking after that. Even their breathing felt too loud. Toward evening the forest tightened. The trees leaned closer, their trunks forming natural corridors that nudged the group forward. Every attempt to turn aside ended in thick brush or sudden drops. Without realizing it, they followed the only open path. And the forest seemed to welcome that decision. The ground leveled. The trees parted. They stepped into a wide circular clearing. The soil here was bare and dark, as if constantly disturbed. Tall cedars ringed the edge in an almost perfect circle. Mara felt the air vibrate faintly under her boots. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Owen nodded. A low hum rose from somewhere beneath the earth. Aaron walked slowly toward the center. The ground there dipped inward like a shallow bowl, and scattered across the dirt were objects. Rusting tent stakes, fragments of nylon, old campfire stones, things left behind. Jules' voice trembled. "This is where it brings people." The hum deepened, and the trees shifted. Not subtly this time. They leaned inward, branches scraping together with a sound like distant bone. The path behind them sealed. The clearing became a circle, a structure. Mara suddenly understood. "The tent," she whispered. The others looked at her. "It moved us here. Not randomly, deliberately. Each night the forest had adjusted their position, aligning them, guiding them closer to the center." The hum swelled into a deep vibration. Then something stepped out from between the trees. At first it looked like another trunk. Tall, dark, but it moved. The shape unfolded slowly, bark bending like muscle. Branches shifted into long jointed limbs. A hollow cavity opened near the top where a face might have been. Inside it was only darkness. Yet the forest responded to it. Every tree around the clearing leaned toward the figure like followers before a leader. Aaron backed away. "What is that?" Mara didn't answer, because the ground beneath them had begun to slide. The circle tightened. The soil softened like damp moss giving way beneath weight. Owen tried to run, but the edge of the clearing was suddenly farther away than it had been seconds ago. The space itself stretched, rearranged. The thing took one slow step forward, and the humming earth swallowed their footprints. Weeks later, at the edge of the forest, a narrow game trail would appear between the trees. Fresh, inviting, and somewhere deep inside the woods the clearing would open again, waiting for the next tent to wake somewhere it didn't remember being.